having been around like Silicon Valley firms again for like almost 3 decades, and and the ones that, you know, if you looked at the firms that either aren't around anymore, I'm not going to pick on names, or that like how well they've done over the last 3 decades compared to the others, if you charted out, where they started and where they are now, there's almost perfect correlation to the ones that have done the better of the Silicon Valley firms are the ones that are sort of function like Cooley does and really have it all for one for all, versus just the, letting people invest themselves in their companies and in their clients and letting them take advisor equity. Like as soon as you let people on the cap table in any way, it just blows up. And then you have like people, it's not fair among the firms because you have litigators and you have people that do real estate and people that do tax and you have
Yes.
people that do public companies and capital markets that don't have those opportunities. And so it's just, they're not going to be, if you're investing, if you're letting people invest personally in the companies or even part of it, it's not suddenly the associates want to work for them and, oh, I'll work on you if you cut me in, and just creates this whole like market and dysfunction and misalignment, where for us, the litigators and the people doing public companies are able to invest in those funds in the exact same amount as they should be.
Dear friends, Kurt Derdix here. If this is your first time listening, I am so glad you found us. This week, we chat with lawyer Dave Young, founding partner at Cooley's Los Angeles office. Cooley Law Firm is arguably the top law firm in the technology sector and handles more than 1,000 venture capital financings each year, advising both investors and companies. Dave's an expert in all things startup, from financings, IPOs, M&As, you name it. He's seen tech booms and busts from Silicon Valley to Seattle. And he really knows how markets move. And we explore LA's vibrant tech scene and why Cooley's model sparks success for its clients. Disclaimer, I'm just a Cooley fan, I'm not a client. And tune in for insights from a legal pro who's seen it all. And on to today's show. Here's Dave. Buddy, so good to see you. Friday
Good to see you.
going into holidays 2023. I saw you a week and a half ago at the Jim Jonathan holiday party. That was so fun. It's
That
so
was
good.
great. It was good to get a chance to chat. Definitely a great event. That one raised a ton of money, so for charity.
Yeah,
So it's
I
good.
think 20K. I love it. I was on the board of Thursday nights, I think 2016, 2017, and Jim Jonathan, aka JJ, is like a non-blood uncle to me. He was at our wedding, and I just love him so much.
He's your uncle. He's my brother. So
Yeah. All
I'm with
right,
you.
there we go. What does that
He's
make
the man.
us? I mean,
Yeah, exactly. Cousins.
so I've been really looking forward to this conversation. I've known you since 2009, which is insane. Going on 15 years.
I think that's right. When you were starting up City Source, is that?
Yeah, yeah, and you were at DLA Piper at the time, and we didn't work with you, but we worked with some of your colleagues, and then you went off and started the Cooley office. What year was that?
We started Cooley's office in LA in Santa Monica in 2012.
Yeah,
So a few years later.
yeah, and you guys have just had an incredible run. So much to cover. Even though we haven't collaborated formally, I mean, you and I looked this up on LinkedIn. We have 220 mutual contacts, and you're sort of like, I think, you kind of compete with Jim Jonathan as the unofficial mayor of Silicon Beach.
Nice. Yeah,
Yeah,
appreciate that. Yeah,
yeah.
we've been definitely like lurking in the same circles for a long time. You and I. So it's great to connect further.
um yeah, just people just love you. I was doing some work or some research online, and you had one Intel article had you as number one attorney in LA out of 70,000 attorneys in Los Angeles. Why do you think they selected you as number one, Dave? Is that a little pay for play, or what was that? No, I'm kidding.
It's not pay for play. They actually did actually try to get you to pay like $400 to be able to get
Yeah,
some badge to publish or something, but
you're
I
like,
did
I don't
not.
pay, I don't
I did
pay.
not pay it. Yeah. Um,
That's
but
incredible.
yeah, I don't know. I mean, who knows? That list is. I mean, some of those lists they like ask firms to submit a couple people. That one is not done that way. I don't know.
Mhm.
Maybe they just went to Chat GPT and but
Yeah, yeah.
greatest a
I
list. And
met
it's nice. It's always nice to see that. And some of it's just feedback from clients, people out in the world. So it is good to hear.
Yeah, the number two is Yoni over at DLA, and when we were interviewing attorneys for our fund, Real World Asset Group, we talked to him, and he was great energy. I don't know how well you know him.
I don't know him well. It is my former firm, but we didn't overlap. But I've heard great things as well.
Yeah.
Definitely a good guy. If you're not first or
Yep.
last, but
Yeah.
that's okay.
Damn, DLA was expensive. They quoted us like 225, 250K to do the fund formation. It was insane. It
Yeah.
was twice as much as like the next highest bid.
Yeah, I mean that may be hard to calibrate, but it's a challenge like in the legal world, especially working with startups that like it is definitely an outsized expense for companies of all sizes, let alone when you're starting up a fund, starting up a
Yeah.
company. So it's just a challenge to, you know, both for Yoni and for me and for everyone to like just make sure that people are delighted and not just satisfied because it is an outsized expense for all of them. It's a little brutal.
Yeah, yeah. And to be fair, it might not have been an apples for apples quote because we were also talking about international stuff, and that could have been all in, and we were maybe referencing it to just the other U.S. related bids. But yeah, I mean, the legal stuff is it's one of these things where my uncle's an attorney, and he used to just always tell attorney jokes at the family gatherings, and it was always pretty funny how self-deprecating he was, and there's so
Yeah.
much ground I want to cover with you because it's like for guys like me that have been in business a while, but I didn't go to law school, and so I always felt like for example, I'm studying for my CFA right now, and I'm getting sharp with accounting and all that stuff. And that was another area where I just sort of felt like I just was, you know, just had a blindness around, and I just feel so much more confident in what we're doing, having that expertise. And I worked for like Jason Nazar for a while at DocStock, and I know he got a JD at Pepperdine, and that's kind of a question that I actually, one of the first questions I wanted to ask is like, what, in your sense, what advantages have you seen with entrepreneurs that have a legal background versus don't? What's sort of the one of the differences you see there?
Yeah, and I was actually DocStock's counsel from inception. I didn't realize you were there. That's great. I remember, we were like negotiating the term sheet for what was then. It was long ago enough now that it was called Series A because Series Seed
Yeah,
wasn't even a term. Like
yeah.
that term wasn't a thing yet. But they were like negotiating that with Crosscut, like while Jason was still at Pepperdine and taking
that must have been
he
like
was studying for the bar exam. It was like 2006 maybe
oh yeah, something.
2005.
Yeah, maybe not that early, but at least '08, like somewhere around there.
Yeah, it was pretty early,
Pretty
maybe an
early.
early. But anyway, I mean, I think it's helpful. I mean, I think it gives people sort of a certain way of looking at the world, and it depends a little bit, right? I mean, it's hard when people try and are jumping in the business side where they have more of a litigation background because they're used to viewing the world in terms of risk and people battling, and sometimes that makes people over index on things. Like just an example, someone that's been a litigator, they'll tell you like, wow, if you do this, like you're going to get sued half the time. And it's like, no, that's just the time it crossed your desk because you're a litigator. The person gets sued like 1% of the time. People do this all the time. It's just that
Yeah,
you never saw it because you're seeing this limited view of the world when people are fighting with each other. And so, it changes a little bit of perspective there. But I think that, the education and just how to think critically and analyze things, I think is helpful. It's just good to, to sort of your point of wanting to understand accounting and different things. Like I did an MBA as well. And, and it's just, it's helpful to I'm probably the most helpful thing is somehow clients just think you're smarter, know more about business because you have an MBA. But the reality is it does help as far as just having corporate finance and accounting and even
yeah,
statistics and the different things that like, and just even marketing, like the things that come along with that. It just, being, having that education and background does help you, even if you're applying it to, to something else. Jason's a good example out of someone that took it in a different direction, has done amazing. And I think it's, we do see a lot of people out there, and it may be the smart ones, who, get law degrees and go do something else. Like your point about your relative telling lawyer jokes. Like I more or less like hate dealing with lawyers. It's just, hate lawyers, I guess, but I'm just stuck dealing with them because of the world that I live in. And maybe that's overgeneralizing. Obviously, it is. A lot of my good friends are lawyers, but in general, there are certain approaches to things that even on the transactional side are that are the cause for those lawyer jokes. People who like they're going to concede a point, and they know they're going to, like in a New York M&A, New York style M&A negotiation. They know they're going to concede something, but only if you actually like have the intestinal fortitude to like argue for 90 seconds, making your point about why you need it. And if you don't do that, they're not going to give the point, which is just stupid. Like if you're going to give the point, you think it's reasonable, just give it. Don't like enjoy the fight and enjoy the arguing. But that's just unfortunately how some lawyers are wired, and it just makes things expensive and makes puts a lot of friction.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of a multi-layered onion. What comes out there is that because it's a time-based billing thing, and it's you have to sort of like be able to demonstrate value, and that I think probably through negotiating is probably a pretty good way to be able to do that. And what can you negotiate on behalf of your client, and especially if the client's on the phone. I guess the insight about only the 50% that come across your desk is a really great insight. Any idea what that kind of bias is called? There must be some academic term for that kind of bias.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. And sometimes you're right, because it's just seeing the wrong, it's seeing the wrong sample set, and then sometimes there's just areas where people, if people know too much, you sort of go too deep on your own, in your own area on things that don't necessarily matter out in the world, right? So that's just where having judgment is the important thing, right? Like as lawyers, like being able to look at an agreement and figure out like how to make each sentence better for your client or your side is super easy, and that's like table stakes. It's being able to like figure out what's important and focus on what's important and focus on what matters, and have and I guess to the point of not over indexing experience, have enough experience to know what's really going to matter, right? And not trying to avoid that kind of confirmation bias or whatever it would be called.
Yeah, a couple of thoughts. One, this idea around does it make business sense versus legal, and kind of looking at how to harmonize the two. And then also just I've had some really poor experiences with bad attorneys, some of which that we won't need to name names. I was going to cough his name, but we won't. And then first name starts with a J, last name starts with an A. And then some really inexperienced attorneys that were negotiating on my behalf that I was young, and I just thought if you were an attorney, you just sort of knew the law, and so I've seen, and then I've had incredible attorneys that have just done some of the best money I've ever spent is actually with some attorneys that did some great work for us and netted out an incredible result, and it was their process that got that result. So I've sort of seen the gamut. And taking the first topic, how do you balance sort of the business dimension and harmonizing the legal risk? Do you have a framework for that, or is it case by case? Or talk to us about that.
Well, I mean, I think at some level you just have to sort of realize that everything is a business decision, right? And that including taking risk, and whether so it's just so if you sort of approach it with that framework, I think that's what makes it easier. That and then I think some of those better lawyers are the ones that actually are using their judgment to help the client analyze that risk, because that's why they've hired you. That's why they're paying $1,000 an hour, whatever like ridiculous rate they're paying, is because of having 30 years or however many years a person been doing it of doing nothing but that kind of deal. And so, or, dealing with similar companies, trying to do similar things or, facing similar challenges. And so, if you're able to sort of layer on that experience and, help the clients make the decision and not always say, okay, here's how it works legally and push it back to them. I think you know, that's the real, that's the real problem. And then at the same time, that's the external facing part of it. The internal facing part of it, like within a law firm, is the same thing. That you're a business, and your business is to make your clients happy, and that's not always to, you know, like churn through everything, to the maximum extent, because that's going to be really expensive and the deal's not going to be smooth. Like if you're representing an investor to make it a little more clear, on a Series A preferred stock financing in a startup or a venture-backed company, they want to get that deal closed efficiently within 3 or 4 weeks, and they want it to be smooth. And so, yes, you have to identify the important issues and negotiate the financing documents so that they work. But actually, what some people might view as doing a better job on the financing and pushing for all of these investor favorable things and having to have a bunch of calls and picking at diligence things that ultimately aren't really going to matter because the investor is going to own 20% of the company and be aligned with the company to solve those issues. That's not necessarily what the client wants or is in their interest. Like that, yes, maybe you made a few sentences better for them, but you made the process choppy, you made it take longer, you made it more expensive, and that's not why they hired you. They hired you to get the deal done smoothly and flag what's important, right? So it's just that, I guess it's that same ability from a business level is, you can look at risk, but then you want to being able to prioritize what are the things that really matter. I think what kind of separates the great from the good from the terrible.
And there's that time tested adage that, or all the pun intended, that time is the killer of all deals.
Yeah, exactly. That's that's exactly right. And and people, even when people have term sheets signed and they're pushing to get a binding definitive agreement signed ASAP, really kind of for no reason other than they just want to get it done quickly, they're not wrong. They're they're doing it before something happens in the world that causes some major shock, and a COVID, a 9/11, there's these things, and yes, does that normally happen? No, but it definitely has. It's and sometimes it's an external shock, and sometimes it's internal. I've had deals where, one example is, we had a financing that's all set. This was years ago. This is probably 2008, but all set to close, and we didn't get it done. We were trying to get it done by the August, a certain day, April 30th or something, and then we missed the target closing date, and May 1st came around, and all the funds were in escrow, documents signed, everything ready to go except for this one investor. And May 1st came around, and Siemens said, hey, by the way, we know we said we wanted to close by April 30, and that was because we have a new CEO and we've shut down our venture fund, and we're not doing any more venture investing, and the deal never closed. And and that company was raising 10 million, ended up having to go raise 3 at a much lower valuation, and that was 8 months later. And so there are times where people push to close for not for no specific reason, because time kills all deals, as you said, and they're totally right. Because I still I remember which deals just never closed again because of COVID, because of 9/11, because of things that happened, or just it shocks to the economy, and it sucks for those companies. It's not their fault.
Yeah. So, pressing rewind, you've been practicing law for a minute now. I think you told me at the we hung out at coffee last month. 95 is when you started practicing.
Yeah, exactly. So I started in 95, which was a really, it was an amazingly just lucky time for me to sort of jump into working with startups and technology companies. And venture-backed companies, really because that was just, the internet, Yahoo and Netscape went public in 94 or whatever. And so that was when things really started
Yep.
exploding and taking off. And it was just a period where, like, from 94, 95 to maybe 1998, 1999, there were 6 times more venture-backed companies in that period. And so the people who had, that set of Silicon Valley firms that had really been doing that work, there was such a high demand for people that had actually been doing it for a while. And then as things progressed, people that had been doing it since 95, it actually was longer than, almost everyone. So it sort of was like right as it really started to blow up. And so it's not a coincidence a lot of the people that like started in that practice around that time are the ones that are like leading law firms and doing well. And, they just sort of, were senior associates during the internet bubble, and then, just took off since then, because there just were so many less experienced people jumping in to the space just by definition. It was like crypto more recently, where like people that have been, or Web3, people that have been doing it for 5 years, that was an eternity because no one had been doing it for longer, right? It was it was kind of that same thing. There wasn't no one that been doing it for longer, but there were very few people that had. And so it was this huge advantage that, was just, again, just more lucky than smart, but that's how things work sometimes.
Why did you want to study law and practice law? And it was the tech sector just right place at the right time? Or was it an insight that you had, or a little bit of both? Talk to us about that.
Yeah, so for me, so I don't know that, going to law school, and then again, I mentioned I did a JD MBA, so business school as well. I wouldn't say that was the most thoughtful decision in the world, partly because, I wanted to go to graduate school, but I was coming out of college in the early 90s, and that was a really bad recession, but that was a recession that was in particular really, really hard on LA. Like the defense sector got just destroyed in the early 90s, and that's what LA was at the time. It's hard to remember that now, but because it's changed so much. And so the job market sucked, and so I just didn't want to get a job. And also I liked going to school. I liked having the free time, and I wasn't the most motivated person, student, and so I just didn't want to get a job. And so I went, and I couldn't decide between law school and business school. So I'm like, oh, well, I'll just park myself for an extra year, do 4 years and do both. And so, and I definitely had a business bent. And so I knew I wanted to, and then even like deciding, coming with the JD MBA, even deciding like whether I want to do business or law, like, I had a ton of student loans from doing graduate school at a private school, and the law jobs paid more than the business jobs. And that was literally like that was my thought process. And that's what drove me towards that, because I was going to be able to pay the loans more easily. But I did know, I had the business background. And so I knew I wanted to do something transactional, something business related. And I had grown up in Silicon Valley. And so that's really like, I was saying when interviewed, oh, I want to work with emerging companies. And I was like, saying the right terms. Did I really know what it meant? And did I really know what it was? Not really. Like, and especially because back then, again, that was pre-internet. And so there just wasn't the information. It's hard to even imagine this now, but there wasn't information on like who the law firms were and even what they did. Like there was nowhere to like look up and read about the law firms. Like there was like, pamphlets and little photocopied 3-page forms with numbers of people in each office and salary numbers in like the law school job placement office or whatever. But people weren't as smart back then about what was going on. So I got a little bit lucky. Like I did say that and ended up with, in San Diego at Gray Carey, which is the predecessor GLA Piper, and they had just merged a San Diego firm with a Silicon Valley firm, Gray Carey in San Diego, Ware and Friedrich in Silicon Valley. And so we're starting like a North County San Diego tech only focused office. So I was like, lawyer number 6 in that office. And so it worked out really well that I was like on the ground floor of like, starting out in one of the like burgeoning tech markets and getting to do it. And it worked out really well for me. But again, I went looking for it, but not really for very thoughtful reasons. It was more just because I was in Silicon Valley. That was like,
but you were probably also, you were young, you were, kind of tuned into the zeitgeist, and probably some kind of like spidey sense around it of what was kind of on deck. And that's all great. How, I mean, look, you've been practicing almost 30 years. You're still a young guy, and it's incredible, the experience, the markets that you've been through, the dot-com boom, the crash, and, into uh, '08 and COVID, so I want to talk a little bit about that. Um, Favorite market that you've participated in, and why?
Yeah, and I think, and it's interesting because, I can almost look at that in two different ways, right? That I've had, I unintentionally, I had sort of jumped around markets, meaning geographic markets a
Yeah.
lot. And then also there's a different like time period markets where I spent time in San Diego and then some time in Silicon Valley. And then I was in Seattle at Venture Law Group where I was again like lawyer number 6 of an office that grew a ton, during the internet bubble. So great time there. Started Venture Law Group's LA office to lawyer number, 1 out of 2 in 2000 when I moved to LA. And then eventually founding Cooley's office in 2012. So I had sort of saw San Diego, saw Silicon Valley, Seattle, and LA, but then also was in, 4 different times was, either lawyer number 1 or one of the first 6 lawyers in an office of a Silicon Valley firm in those different non-Silicon Valley markets. So just had a really good, interesting sense of how to attack a new market and how different like tech markets grow and what makes them boom. And they're like, being in Seattle in 1998, 99, 2000 was amazing because that was just such a fun time with the internet and everything being, so new and just so crazy. But, LA has just, certainly the funnest market from that perspective was just you know, I'd have to say it was the more recent years in LA where, LA had went from being a solidly third tier venture market when I first came down in 2000 and like wrote a business plan for Venture Law Group about why it was going to make sense. And at that time, LA was the fastest growing venture market on a percentage basis.
Mm-hmm.
But then it actually got hit the hardest of any market, but it's still a third tier market. And it got hit the hardest of any market in 2001, 2, and 3 because all LA had was internet companies. And it's hard it didn't have any life sciences, didn't have really any networking companies or hardware companies. And it's hard to imagine that like being an internet company was a bad thing. But in 2003, it actually was. Like it was, those are the companies that had all the hype and were funded and didn't have went public with no business model. And so, LA actually got hit the worst. And then, kind of 2005, 6, 7, as the web 2.0, I guess it was called, like started to really hit, LA was suddenly, in the middle of that with, MySpace and Lower My Bills and, had these exits that were $500-600 million exits, which were huge at the time, and really started to just take off. And then, it just accelerated. Opening the Cooley office was at the right time. Again, maybe more luck than doing that on purpose, but started that. If you look at the growth in LA, that 2012 and on, has just been amazing, building to just 2021 with this just craziness with record IPOs.
Yeah, so you say that kind of post-COVID boom was probably your favorite in LA was your favorite market.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean that makes sense. I mean, if with all that experience and all the sort of momentum and at that point 10 years of Cooley kind of in LA and
so like everything I'd been doing up until then was sort of preparing for that for that craziness, having built the team, having built the skill sets, having built seeing a different market. So that's which is sort of how things work in life, right? You spend a bunch of time doing different things and then that hopefully they're preparing you for what you're doing next.
I don't really know much else other than LA. I mean, I did spend a year in San Francisco when I was on the BD team at Lime, and that was in 2017, 2018, and living with Holden there. And I sort of felt like at that time it was a really weird time to be in San Francisco. It was like, I mean, I was pretty heads down with the business, but even my friends there were just, had families and were too busy, and I didn't really get to see a lot of people. Whereas in LA, when I came into the market in 08, 09, it was collegiate. There was like, we were young and we were doing events all the time and we were all sort of like figuring it out together.
But
And
LA absolutely, like, of all markets, of just being interconnected and having a ton of events and having, sort of a community, it really has helped LA grow. And I think that some of it's just the nature of the kinds of companies and the nature of the market. Like, just, in, I don't know, if you not to, if you went to San Diego, it's life sciences companies, people have PhDs. They're not, maybe the founder's a little older. They're just not, as excited to go network and hang out together. They're not even excited to like introduce themselves to, introduce their CEOs to people like you or people like me or people, to others. They're just not, the sort of networking part of it doesn't matter as
yeah,
much to their business and to their success. And then it's just the DNA of LA. And, and I think that the demographics worked, but New York as well, right? New York and LA both went from being third tier markets to being the solidly number two and number three, um, venture markets. And, there's a few reasons for that, but um, it's been great to see.
yeah, San Francisco, it's at a high altitude. It's such a large market. There's so much money and it feels very cliquish to me.
Yeah, it is. And that's right. And people, at some extent, people don't, they don't rely on the organizations and different things as much as they need to because they don't need to, right?
Yeah.
Like, if you were trying to start a tech market in, Kansas City or something, you'd like have like some group that would be like everything. Like, okay, this is the people that are making this happen. Where, they're like, you just don't need it. So it's the good and the bad of being just such a dominant,
Yeah. Yeah.
market where LA's, the number three venture market, but that's 35% of the market that's number one. They really have this massive, you know.
Yeah, and I think the thing that's interesting, I've heard it say that LA is the dystopia, well, that San Francisco is the utopia gone wrong, and Los Angeles is the dystopia gone right. I don't know if
Yeah,
that's
I
true,
love
but
that. I've
it
never
is
heard that.
where you have a lot of these, especially during COVID, a lot of the San Francisco crew started coming down, and I know like A16Z, Andreessen Horowitz set up a big LA office. Is that up yet? Is that live?
I think
I
it
thought,
is. Yeah, I think it's
yeah,
on Second Street, like right a
yeah,
block in Santa Monica,
yeah,
like right near my office.
yeah, big one. Yeah, and I think in the context of LA, it is very open. Like I got a note a couple years back from Jim Jonathan saying, "Hey, like, I want to help David Cooley find a BD lead for the LA office." And who could refer, who's like the Kurty D of a couple years ago. And I was like, "Oh, you got to meet Rachel Horning." And referred her in, and she's seems like she's done an incredible job for you guys the last couple of years, helping kind of do what she does best, which is build community. And I think it's incredible that you guys have somebody. Not only that role is open, but you guys did such a good job filling it.
Yeah, well, we only did a good job filling it because of you, so we do appreciate that. I know you won. Like,
Well, it wasn't just me though. It was JJ.
it
It
was
was
JJ, but
it was
right. He's the one that actually proactively, like, without, and he actually sent us, I think, half of our best candidates. It wasn't,
yeah,
just her, but and and I sent him. I mean, it wasn't his search fee, but some, like, magnum of really nice wine or something. He got some gift that probably should have gone to you, so maybe I owe you
oh no,
a
no, it's
gift.
all good.
And
Well,
and I know that, like, that's, you operate in a similar way to me, that, like, it's sort of how can I be helpful, and then you do things like that, and then just good things come from it, right? It might be 3 years later, might be 5 years later,
yeah,
might be whenever later, right? And JJ absolutely operates that way, and that's why that happened, right? That, like, you get, Rachel, Horning, who is you mentioned, our, like, SVP of business development in LA, who, it's a misnomer. Like, she's like a super connector that just, in the community, is the role that she plays for us, of just getting to know investors, getting to know companies, helping connect them, being out, coordinating events. I think it's a fun role for her, but she's crushed it, and it's one that's maybe a little unique for most law firms. I think partly because if you didn't really have a startup kind of venture focused practice, it wouldn't probably function in the same way. If you're
Mhm.
just chasing, um, public companies or whatever, it's not quite gonna work. But that was a great example of just that close knit network in LA and how people operate, sort of helping lift the boat for everyone. Yeah.
Yeah, Adam Grant, professor of management at Wharton, wrote a book called Give and Take. It's a short little book. Have you read this book?
I have not.
I could share the insight, but it
I've
gives an
heard
insight
great things from him, though.
into
I've
the
read some
Los
things.
Angeles market, and these, it's essentially that there's three classes of people. There's givers, matchers, and takers. And you could probably think off the top of your head, like Jim Jonathan through and through as a giver. But there's two kinds of givers. There's two cohorts. There's givers that give to other givers, and then there's givers that give to anybody indiscriminately. And the
Interesting.
givers that indiscriminately give underperform all classes. And the givers that give to other,
Underperform.
yeah, they underperform. And
Interesting.
the givers that give to other givers outperform all classes.
That's
And
amazing. I'm
it's
gonna
a
have to read
subtle
this.
distinction because a giver that gives to other givers is not a matcher. They're not doing it for a quid pro quo.
Right. That's right.
But they're also able to somehow figure out who the others are, who are the other givers to givers. And it's this sort of reflexive loop that happens, and it kind of like I don't know, it's some
No, it's
kind of
interesting.
news alignment that happens.
Yeah, it's interesting because I would hope I'm a giver that gives other givers. I don't know, but the way it's interesting because like the way that the way we're just referrals of, and again we sort of operating again in this like venture backed company, startup company community. The way that referrals work, like they very rarely are where the people sit at different stages in the company's life where like they're not they actually don't they're not even set up to go quid pro quo. And like for example, like there are people that refer companies to me, but that's because the company is like very early stage or doing their first round of financing. But then like when I refer companies to investment bankers or accountants or recruiters or the companies they deal with are already like post series A and already have quality counsel 98% of the time.
Mhm.
But that's fine. Like I don't care. And sometimes they're like, "Oh, I can't. How do I refer back to you?" And it's like it doesn't matter. Like I'm just referring to the person I think is going to do the best job for the company. Like I'm not referring it because I'm expecting you to like go out of your way to try and send something back to me. I'm trying to be helpful to this company, and if I'm helpful to you, again to your point, like good things will happen in the world later. But that's not that's not why you do it. And it doesn't even work well again because people sit in the same way that people send companies to me. Like I can send them a bottle of wine at the holidays, which should probably get around to, given that we're about into the Christmas and New Year's break. Maybe I should get on that, but but that's about it because again, like they're doing something else where they're seeing this pipeline of early companies, but what they're doing in the world isn't where companies are like that. I'm not referring companies like that back to them because they're not ready for that person.
Yeah. Kind of turning the page, but kind of in that similar breath in a way. Are you able to talk publicly about Cooley's uh how you guys do your investments and the kind of the pool and you invest in your companies?
I think so. I mean, yeah. I mean, we do. We do try, and we do have two funds. We have one fund that invests in venture capital funds, and one fund that invests in companies. And 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 we actually invest pretty actively. Like we try and invest in a significant majority of the company's financing, and it's really calibrated on like if there's a real lead investor, venture fund or a seed fund or a professional investor that's writing a much larger check and we're a small check trailing behind, we're generally happy to do it. And then we just sort of get, you know, hopefully we have quality clients, and hopefully the ones we're looking at doing it in are even more quality than the average. And then it all, we calibrate it based on there being an investor. But it's something we definitely do really actively. The partners contribute to voluntarily, and we really, you know, align it where we're not even permitted to make other private company or fund investments unless it is flows through the fund, because we just want people, to really be aligned and not
Yes.
have people like, like having me go make an investment in some startup, and then maybe they give me a better deal, and I'm like giving them, they're not a client, but I'm like an advisor and getting equity. Like, we just want to make sure people aren't doing that, because we would have
Yeah.
so many opportunities too, that we want to keep everyone,
I know, I love it.
aligned.
Like, cause I mean, I found that out when I was pitching you our fund, and you're like, "Hey, love it," but we got our own thing, and you were describing how the mechanism worked, and I was really when I kind of took a step back and thought about it, I was really pleased in the context of it does really align incentives. It helps to you know it helps keep the partners focused, and it helps weed out people from kind of have self-dealing.
Well,
I think
yeah, and just having been around like Silicon Valley firms again for like almost 3 decades, and and the ones that, you know if you looked at the firms that either aren't around anymore, I'm not going to pick on names, or that like how well they've done over the last 3 decades compared to the others, if you charted out, where they started and where they are now, there's almost perfect correlation to the ones that have done the better of the Silicon Valley firms are the ones that are sort of function like Cooley does and really have it all for one, one for all, versus just the, letting people invest themselves in their companies and in their clients and letting them take advisor equity. Like, as soon as you let people on the cap table in any way, it just blows up. And then you have like people, it's not fair among the firm, because you have litigators and you have people that do real estate and people that do tax, and you have
yes,
people that do public companies and capital markets that don't have those opportunities. And so it's just, they're not going to be, if you're investing, if you're letting people invest personally in the companies or even part of it, it's not suddenly the associates want to work for them, and, oh, I'll work on you if you cut me in, and it just creates this whole like market and dysfunction and misalignment, where for us, the litigators and the people doing public companies are able to invest in those funds in the exact same amount as they should be, right? And so it doesn't gear more towards the people who are producing the opportunities. It just keeps everyone aligned, because it goes to everyone, and every once in a while we have a snowflake where we're like in the, the company snowflake, in
yeah,
the, the seed round, and then the Series A, and then the Series B, all the way up to the $68 billion IPO valuation. And it just, those happen every couple decades or maybe once a decade, but that was, maybe 2021. And when they do, it's absolutely amazing.
yeah, I love
So,
it. Well, it's really and just kind of talking about it, it seems so obvious and so simple. And then you kind of play the tape and you're talking about this correlation between firms that have sort of this kind of investor, fund mechanism that have sustained. And that does make sense because it helps to get the team aligned, and it keeps everybody in the line also with the customer. And it's a really, really smart play.
yeah, you want to have glue, and you want to have people that aren't mercenary. And the reality is, it's the same with the clients, right? Like I mean, one, like it isn't how it works for us, because it's a separate fund that partners contribute the one to. But from the client's perspective, if you wired $100,000 in their financing, and then there's $100,000 in legal fees over the next year, like, from their perspective, you actually worked for stock because it nets out, right? And so they like can feel like, hey, these people are
Yeah,
really working for stock.
yeah,
And even putting that aside, it does just align interests to like have, you know, be aligned with their success. And the reason it's not a little more common is just because there's a lot of firms. Like, I think the general like traditional New York like law firm perspective was that was a conflict and you shouldn't be doing it. We do have to have them waive the conflict, because we're like on the other side of the deal when we're doing it, right? And so, we're, actually investor on the investor side, even though we're representing the company and negotiating everything. So they do have to waive the conflict, but we just look at it as aligning interests, and they waive it. And
well, yeah.
that's
I mean,
that's partly why.
you guys have skin in the game, and this gets back to my question about how to balance and harmonize, the business objective with just like
Yeah.
the perverse incentive of like, the how do you bill for time and all that sort of
Well,
thing. And
And that's honestly, I mean, that's the fun part about doing deals, not just on the legal side, but also on the legal side, and even doing like financings and sort of the growth company related things, because it's like much more rewarding when you're doing things that are structured to create alignment of interest, and that's what works well, right? Like when a venture investor invests in a company, that's really what it's about, is like aligning interests so that the founders aren't going to make money unless the investors do. The investors aren't going to make money until the founders do. But we're going to like create incentives for the people to stick around, and it all is incentivized to like work together and everyone make a ton of money, as opposed to like litigation where you're fighting over stuff, or even M&A where it's kind of the end of the story and it's a zero sum game. You're like fighting over who's going to pay the $30,000 escrow agent fee, and it's like he's like zero sum. Like where's that going to go? As opposed to like just again alignment of interest to go and take them out and win together, which is why again structuring partnerships, structuring investments, structuring business deals is fun, because it's about making sure that people are aligned and win together.
Yeah, I love it. Well, turning the page and keeping an eye on the clock. One of the core themes of the show is humanizing success, and I've shared a little bit about some of the challenges I've overcome with my hearing and helping my dad get sober, and I really do believe the bigger the breakdown, the bigger the possibility for breakthroughs. And having said that, is there a challenge personally or professionally, Dave, that you're comfortable sharing publicly? And how'd you get over the hurdle, and what gift did that pain give you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's you know, I think there were some, I mentioned that I'd moved around, a lot in different markets early on, and some of that was just because of, you know, personal stuff that was going on in my life, and like those first couple moves were all, related to like, at my wife early on, ex-wife, that there were some issues there, and that just so I ended up moving to these different markets because of that. That's why I moved from San Diego to Palo Alto. That's why from Palo Alto to Seattle. Seattle wasn't really where I wanted to be. It was because of that, and so that's why I moved back to LA. And so that sort of took three different moves of moving to completely different cities and doing completely different practices. And and I think it's just where I've always one of the things is we all just have to be Zen masters, right? And you like take those situations, or take negative things and turn them into positives, right? And so, taking that and just leveraging, okay, well, it gave me the ability to like work with different people, see different markets, see how the Silicon Valley ecosystem functions, see how Seattle did. Like you're able to take these sort of personal challenges, but then, find good things. I met my, not current wife, my wife of 22 years, who we have two amazing kids in college and in Seattle, convinced her to move back down to LA with me. So it all worked out for the best, right? It's sort of, wherever it was in life, what life is 10% what happens to you and 90% how you handle it.
I love that.
And I've just tried to embody that and sort of just, move on, make things work, and and again, and be a Zen master. And when negative things happen, really try and turn it in to, to a positive.
Yeah. No, I mean, I really appreciate you being candid about that example. I mean, that's one of the insights of the show, that when I ask this question, that just over and over again, it's like, life is hard. Like, it's hard to get wealthy. It's hard to be poor. It's hard to get healthy. It's hard to be sick. It's all hard. So like, we get to choose our hard wisely. And I love how you're framing it, as far as like, 10% of it, life is what happens to you, and 90% is how you respond. Cause that is really the Zen master insight.
Yeah, no, I think I think that's right. And I agree with you that, everything, is hard. And, and there's even, and that's why you have to sort of take a look at things and, give people a pass as far as what's going on in their life. Like I had some health challenges like the end of 2017, 2018, where I had this like, you know, GI infection, was in the hospital for 10 days, like had sepsis infection where I was like 50-50 whether I was going to live, right? And like it turned out it was because I like have this bizarre thing where I like can't digest any sugar or carbs. It's like super, super rare. And so it just been like, I had felt horrible my entire life until then, but I didn't know. If you always feel horrible, you don't know the difference, right?
Yeah, totally.
And so like if I chart my business success and like look at like statistics within Cooley and the like I did well up until 2018. But after I like had that life event and got healthy, I have done way better. Like it's actually really in all aspects of my life, it's really noticeable. And so sometimes like, being healthy, you have to appreciate it. And, and again, if people have things that are going on, like you got to be self-aware and help. Cause like if I'd figured that out earlier, it would have been a lot better. So again, it's just like,
well, you look better than ever since the time I've known you. So I'm glad that you got that sorted. That's amazing. Final question. And then we're going to wrap up because I know you probably have a meeting top of the hour and I want to be sensitive to time. But if you could, this is kind of a fun question. I love the responses. If you could have any band, musician, artist, rapper, singer, songwriter, play any venue in the world, past, future, present, who would it be and where?
Any band, anywhere. So that's a good one. So like if you ask like any of my friends like from high school, college, law school, the day, and like what's Dave's favorite band, like they would say AC/DC because that was just always the answer. I don't know that partly I had a dog. I had a English sheep. My last name's Young. I had an English sheepdog named Angus.
Love it.
4 years, right? We'll have to get Malcolm at some point along the way. And so even though like, do I like go turn on AC/DC while I'm working? Not really. Like it would have to be AC/DC like right out here in my backyard.
Yeah.
I guess is what I'd have to say. And maybe like until a few years ago, I lived across the street from Axl Rose. And so I never got to see AC/DC when he actually on the tour, which I think was mostly in Europe where he subbed in and sang. But I guess it'd be AC/DC with Axl, my former neighbor, at the microphone playing in my backyard with all my best friends would be the answer.
Love it. Awesome. Dave Young, you're a scholar and a gentleman. I'm so delighted that we got to spend some time. I learned some new things about you, and I appreciate you being so candid and such a great sort of Sherpa to so many of us in the market here locally in Los Angeles Tech. And I hope you have a wonderful holidays. And I'm so grateful that we got to spend some time to
you too. I appreciate it. Happy holidays.
Cool. See ya.
Thanks.
Thanks again to my friend Dave Young for being our guest. I'm excited to continue to track Dave's awesome work and impact on our community. I encourage you to connect with Dave on LinkedIn if he or his team can be helpful to you. I'm at Kurty D on Twitter and Instagram and Kurt Derdix on LinkedIn. If the content moved you, please do give us a review. And until next time, Kurty D loves you.